issues in education is the creation of Ittner Architects. And Dennis Young is sitting alongside me. And Dennis, I feel like you should do the introductions to these two gentlemen. I think you've met before.
Well, we've had many districts say, well, why don't you have some of your designers on? And, after, this is the third year, we thought, well, let's really bring the people on that are designing these schools and working with educators and communities every day. So with us is Greg Goebel, who's Director of Design. Greg has spent the last, how many years?
10
a decade in schools, and it has changed so dramatically. So it's great to have him here and to talk about what are the cutting-edge issues in design today. And Todd Powers, who's Vice President of Ittner Architects, who has been working with communities for quite a while, a whole range, large, urban, rural, and has a really interesting perspective that he's here to share.
Well, let's start it right off there. Todd, as we talk a little bit about some of the districts that have been here with us, we've heard so far this morning nothing but diversity. Everybody has different needs. Everybody has different populations. So how do you begin your job when you're working with a district to create a new school?
Well, for us, education, it spans all markets. Traditionally, it was all about, K through 12 and higher ed. But these days, we spend a lot of time focusing on pre-K, the 3 through 5 age group. And we span, way beyond the 18 to 22 age group as well, into industry. We've expanded into things like dental schools and things of that nature. But we're here today at MSBA, which is about public education. And there's over 500 school districts represented here today potentially. And as you said, every one of them has a different need, different dynamic, things that are going on in their community. And that's what we really want to focus on today. William B. Ittner, our founder, over 100 years ago, recognized something very unique and innovative, that community was key in public schools. And up till that time, that was kind of ignored. And we're very proud to carry on that tradition today. And so when we go to work with the community, we have to listen. You have to listen to these folks very carefully, find out what their needs are, find out what their financial capabilities are, find out where they want to carry their program. When you're out state, you're dealing with maybe a vocational agricultural program that's very heavy. When you're in an urban area, that's not a focus at all. So we have to be very clear about that. We always dive in to get the data. We have to find out everything we can about a school district. So we approach each project from our side very much in the same way, but the end results, the outcomes are always exceptionally different. We've never had a repeat.
Yeah, and since design is so critically important in implementing the kinds of options that those community leaders select, it's really about understanding what kinds of teaching needs to occur in those schools. And you're involved in listening and responding back with 3D images and trying to get all that input as you design. So you might talk about that.
We're about options, and it's interesting because Todd mentioned community-based. Every community is different. And one of the things I'm proud of as a designer at Ittner is that our buildings don't all look the same. They're very responsive to who we work for and their needs and aspirations. And so when you look at our work, it's pretty diverse, spread all over the place and deliberately by design.
Right. Things are changing really rapidly. And Dennis, you were telling me some of this off the air as well, that even 20 years ago you would still see schools that from the outside look like nothing but brick. And if that's the case, then on the inside, the kids see nothing but wall.
Right.
You can't do education that way anymore.
No. And, today districts are looking for different types of educational outcomes. And, sometimes you just can't do it with the way schools were designed in the 50s,
right.
40s, for that matter, even the 70s. So one of the really key issues that is in the news every day, unfortunately, is the idea of safe schools.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea, and we were here just about an hour ago talking about mental health in schools. So safe schools is such an important concept in that a child can't learn if they don't feel safe, and teachers can't teach if they don't feel safe. So I don't know which one of you want to pick up on that one, probably both of you.
Well, I'll start. One of the things that we try and implement these days is age-appropriate safety and security. Obviously, the needs of the 3 to 5 pre-K student are way different than they are of the high school age student. Everything about their day is different. We kind of boil it down to transitions. Everything that a 3 through 5 student does takes a transition. The teacher has to organize them to move them from point A to point B, where high schoolers are somewhat self-sufficient in that. So we have to roll out our safety implementations, recognizing that. So, for instance, in the notion of creating a safe room, a storm shelter, an intruder shelter, in the pre-K environment, we like to introduce those locally at the room, basically at the classroom level. We've kind of created some prototypes, innovations where we place a hardened shelter, if you will, between 2 classrooms that the kids access all day long. That's their cubby hall. That's where they keep their books. That's where the teacher stores things. So in the event of an emergency, it's very simple for them to get up, do something they do all day long, move in there, the teacher locks the doors, and they're good to go.
It's not the scary place nobody ever goes in.
Exactly.
Right.
It's very familiar. They're very nice. I mean, they don't look any different than any other part of the building other than they're generally windowless. That's about the distinction.
And the windowless thing is something that's really the only place you'll see that, right? Because windows are an important
windows
part of
are a big
the
deal.
learning environment.
Speaking of legacy, Bill Ittner, the original owner of the company, I mean, he was inspirational and came up with a lot of these things about daylight and air circulation in the buildings, and that was 100 years ago. Those are still very much part of what we do. There are windows everywhere. There's good airflow. But those security components are critical. You can't have a child won't learn in a place they can't be made safe. And we live in challenging times, and a prison is a secure place, but it's not a school. Mm-hmm. We have to be creative in how we institute those safety components to the building so that they're there and function and do everything they're supposed to do without being intrusive or oppressive.
Hey, I wonder, too, about some of the developments because it's as simple as sometimes we think about safety as only being a security component. There's more to it than that. And we had a school board member describe to us a little earlier that a shiny floor is also a slippery floor. So you need to keep kids from hurting themselves while they're at school as well. How do you develop a building that is amenable to that?
Well, we do a lot of research through in materials, and durability is always our number one objective. We're not building a 20-year building when we build a school. We're building a 100-year-plus building. And we have to balance that with budgets because some of the traditional materials that will last 100 years, like terrazzo and things of that nature, are very, very expensive. So we have to balance that, along with things like slip resistance and impact resistance to damage depending on the nature of the school. So it really just takes a lot of research and implementation.
Well, I'm going to just go back to the safe environment concept just for one last comment on it, is that as you all are laying out school plans that meet the curriculum and are flexible and adaptable, you're also engaging at times the local law enforcement, just like we have always engaged the local fire marshal and EMS. So we're engaging more and more people as we're designing the 21st century school. So, and they're giving their opinions from their expertise.
I guarantee that as much experience as we have in this issue, we look at the security of a school, and a law enforcement individual look at things completely differently. And so we solicit their opinions about it because often their take on response time has a big impact on how you structure the building to behave in the event that something goes wrong. And so we solicit all the people that are sort of involved in making a school safe in our design process.
Todd Powers is here with us, and Greg Goebel, both of Ittner Design, Ittner Architects. And so let's talk a little bit about the technology that schools have. It wasn't very long between the time that we went from everybody wiring their house with Cat 5 everywhere to everybody's wireless. We don't need that anymore. So how much looking into the future do you need to do when you develop a school for the technology of the next 10 years?
I don't think looking into the future does you any good because things change so quickly that
Right.
what's accepted as sound practice right now won't be in a year. And so the key is that everything we do is built for flexibility to respond to those needs. It's going to change. We know it. There's no fighting it. We stay along with the curve. We do our research. But at the end of the day, flexibility is key.
The whole idea about how technology has affected the learning process. Kids acquire knowledge differently. They do it now on handheld devices. They don't go down to the computer lab. So the idea of the computer lab is phased out for some districts, still being phased out in others. So who knows? Maybe it'll be the Apple Watch will be the next thing that kids will have, and we'll have to design for that one.
And another thing that I would never have thought would have been a component of education, and yet it seems to be, and it makes perfect sense in this industry, is not only is lighting a big deal, but also sound technology. You want to make sure that everybody can hear everybody from wherever they are. So talk about acoustics and what advances have been made there and how much attention you pay to that when you're designing a school.
The sound can be actually associated with the lighting. Fluorescent lighting actually in some points hums. And some children are very well tuned to that noise, and it's a distraction to the learning process. So we sort of look at acoustics more broadly than you might have guessed. But at the end of the day, the space that they're learning in has to be well managed in terms of acoustics. Materials, the flooring, all those things have an impact on how that works.
I might add along those lines, we were talking in an earlier segment about mental health and the whole range of issues that kids are sensitive to. And the environment is very important. And the ability to observe and supervise these students in terms of their behavior as they come to school, as they leave school, it's all about that mental health. So designing has really taken on a much higher level of understanding those kinds of needs.
And HVAC is a part of that too, right?
Yes, most definitely. I would say that the number one concern of staff and students in a building is always thermal comfort. And, of course, you can't please everyone because one room wants to be at 72 degrees, the next one wants to be at 66, and that's difficult to achieve. But definitely that's a huge part of it. The codes have changed lately to reflect the fact that we have to bring in more and more outside air, fresh air, getting away from – there's a lot of sick buildings out there, built in the 70s, very tight, no fresh air. We try and get away from that because when something gets started in a school during the winter, sickness – spreads like wildfire, so the more fresh air we have can get around that.
Right, and the technology is also amazing when it comes to making these places as quiet, Dennis, as you were talking about, making them quiet, making sure that even a couple of years ago the CFLs, the bulbs, the light bulbs were used everywhere, and now we're finding out that's maybe not such a good idea.
No, it's not, and there's been plenty of studies out there that indicate that if the right kind of environment will affect learning. And one of the areas of that I'd like for one of you guys to speak about is bringing in the outdoors, that natural light. So we kind of break up that sterile environment that is, artificial lighting, artificial, HVAC and air quality, and we bring in that outdoor.
Daylighting's critical. It has been since Bill Ittner created the business. There's studies out that have proven that students just learn better when there's natural light as a source in the space. So we actually manage the daylight by extensive use of glazing with the right aspects, but at the same time we also manage the lighting levels in the room relative to the daylight that's coming in. So often the lighting that's electronic lighting in the space is switched so that as the light levels from outside come up, the energy usage and the electrical lighting goes down so that the light levels remain where they need to be, and you save energy at the same time. And
the windows we were talking about, now the double pane and sometimes triple pane glass that has argon in the middle, so you don't have as much heat transfer. Unfortunately, that's wonderful stuff, but it can also run into an expense. So that balancing act comes back into play, yeah?
Yes, every time. We have to balance the meeting, the modern energy codes with, again, researching the materials and making sure that we are putting together an economical building system. We have to balance that with, the need to jump in.
Well, one of our most important charges is to make sure that we provide options to the people we work for. And it's a whole range in every different functional area to show them that, you can do this 11 different ways. And if you do this, this is how much you'll spend, but the payback is here if you do this. And I think that's one of the things we do remarkably well is provide people with all the information they need to make the decisions that are best for their district and not for the district that's next door.
And as we have talked about, with so many different districts, with so many different needs, the research process is something that has to happen every day.
Absolutely. Now, the good thing is we do almost exclusively educational work. Now, it's a broad range of educational work from very young to very old, but when you do that enough, you sort of learn a lot of lessons along the way that makes them more easily brought to bear for each individual owner.
Well, I've watched Greg design a whole number of buildings in the last 10 years, and as technology of materials and building systems change, you have a whole variety of new tools to incorporate in the design, such as LED lighting.
Absolutely.
And motion sensors that, they work today.
Technology
5 years ago,
is
they
great.
didn't.
Yeah, and the technology he's mentioning actually doesn't apply just to the schoolwork we're doing. It's the presentation of the schoolwork. We do almost everything we do now is three-dimensional, so that when you're speaking to a client about what it is you're up to, you're not kind of convincing them because you speak well. You're showing them images of how your building is going to work and what the materials are going to be, and they can actually sort of get in and inhabit it. And a lot of the debate about a right or a wrong solution goes away when somebody can see exactly what it is you're telling them you're doing.
And Dennis mentioned earlier the feedback that you get from law enforcement, from fire, from all of the first responders. We've also heard from some of the school districts that they're getting feedback from industry, that they're coming to them and saying, we need kids who are going to be able to do this. Do you have the same kinds of outreach into other industries that can tell you what they need a school building to be able to provide?
We poke at a whole lot of different places to find things. And, the one that occurred to me the most recently is the STEM group that we've been working with, where STEM is something that's at this point is still morphing in many different ways. And there's a lot of different understandings of what STEM means, but the STEM Pack people, which is a local group to St. Louis that we bump into frequently, we actually are having them into the office, and they're telling us things that they are encountering out in the work environment that we can then engage as well.
And then as we work with the college and university level, who's also doing STEM, and a variety of other programs, we're listening to what they need students to have in terms of skill sets. Then as we're designing secondary, we're passing that information on and those lessons, passing it down to the middle school, and now we're down at the elementary school level, passing all that, because it's about the academic pathways from the very beginning all the way to the university, and then design accordingly for those programs.
Well, Dennis, it seems